Well, thanks for being with us today, Darrah.
Thank you.
All right. I met Darrah through Jacqueline, who used to do some admin work for the Happen to Your Career podcast, which we just had Scott on, I think, 2 weeks ago. And that was the first podcast I was on 3 years ago. And then I heard Darrah on the podcast giving out fantastic advice about how to network and not have desperation stink, which is my favorite phrase I think I've ever heard on a podcast. So then Darrah and I had a chat over the phone, and I knew anybody as successful as she is definitely has some kind of quit in her background. So Darrah and I ended up talking, and some mindset quits came up. So Darrah, if you could lead us into what kind of transition you were going through when these mindset quits popped up for you.
Totally. So I have a couple mindset things that have always held me back. And the thing that first sort of catalyzed it was one, when I quit the corporate America road and path as a whole, that I graduated from school and was really under this impression that you do the thing everyone tells you, which is, you go to school, you get good grades, you get out, you get a job, you get the house, happily ever after. And I had done all of that. And then it wasn't happily ever after. It was lose your first job, lose your second job, lose your third job all in 3 years. And the economy collapses. You have bought a house, you're 23, and now you're afraid of foreclosing on said house. And suddenly this tale, which I learned was actually a fable, wasn't panning out. So the first thing I did was decided to quit corporate America and quit working for other people and decided to work for myself. And so the long story short is that my twin brother and I, who also was in San Diego at the time of our starting the company, decided to start a credit card processing brokerage, which was really trying and up and down. And now 9 years later, we've grown it into 38 states and it's been quite a success. But where the next quit happened was at about year 7, I made the decision to quit, so to speak, the further intentional growth of that business and made the choice to take my foot completely off the gas and say, I'm going to let this self-sustain, and I'd built it to be pretty operational on its own. And I said, I'm going to dive fully into a business that has grown by accident over the last, it had been 5 years at that point, 7 years now, which was a networking events company, because I felt like not only was there momentum there and an opportunity for growth, but I just felt more aligned at that point in time with the mission of it and the way that I could grow with it. And I really felt like what it could give back to the world by connecting other people more organically and authentically in a peer-to-peer basis felt more like where I wanted to put my energy. So having to make the choice and the commitment to say, okay, I'm going to quit growing this in this way that is making me a lot of money and it's super passive income and this is really easy. Like at that point I could do it in my sleep. Was that end reason was precisely the reason why I needed to quit and go to something else, because it was so non-growth oriented anymore. And so through that process, I really ran into the wall of some of those motivational or mindset issues or challenges of, am I good enough? Who am I to have one successful business? Who am I to think I can have another? Even at the start of the first one, who the hell am I to start one company in the first place? I don't know anything. I've never worked for myself. I could barely hold down these jobs that kept throwing me out. So like a lot of that came up. And then with all of that, a lot of fears around money came up of, the foreclosure, like, am I going to be able to afford my mortgage? Do I have what it takes? Like, am I going to be able to sustainably make money and support myself? Or do I need to rely on other people, even though that didn't seem like a thing that was working anyway? And then the ideas around, what does money mean to me? And like, what's the value of it? And so much else just kept popping up. And I started to realize so much of what I viewed success as at the time was around just financial success. And so it forced me to say to myself, okay, what do these fears really mean? And what are they really about? So the good enough one, I realized, well, maybe I am and maybe I'm not, but I'm not going to know until I start doing it. And then once I start doing it, and the fear would naturally come up more and more as I'd lean into it and try new things constantly. One of the strongest things I was able to do was to look back and say, okay, what data do I have to tell me that I'm not good enough? Like, where have I not been good enough before? And I tended to find that if it was something I was really excited about, that I always found a way to be good enough, even if it wasn't like instantaneous. And so there was no data to support it, which made the fear dissolve. And then same thing with money, where I realized, what is money really about or mean for me? And for me, it was about freedom of how I spend my time and my ability to share my gifts with the world. And if I could create money as a tool to do those things, and not just see it as the end, but a means to an end, that really also shifted my perspective around it, as well as the fear that I had of what's my family or my friends or my community going to think if I'm not successful financially, or if I'm not successful in the way that they expected me to or wanted me to be. And so it also allowed me this chance to sort of quit that expectation and free myself and say, well, what do I actually want? I don't care what they think, because this is the life that I'm living. And so there were a lot of quits throughout that time frame, throughout those many years of mindset and fear and like physical jobs and companies and efforts and energies.
I love that. You even popped in a third quit that we hadn't seen before.
Yeah, we never talked about that quit.
Let's unpack each individually because they're all great. And I want to make sure that we get as much information out as possible. So the first one was the fear of not being good enough, which is now sometimes called imposter syndrome. Like, who am I to be trying this thing? I'm not a fill in the blank, but I'm trying to be it. As if there's generally some school that tells you, yes, you are this thing. I mean, granted, like, coaching, who are you to be a coach? Well, there are coaching schools. You can come out of them and call yourself a coach. But as many people kind of joke, you can come out of a coaching school at 22 if you take one, but like life coach wise, how much life experience do you have, as opposed to maybe a 60-year-old person who's like, could I be a life coach? I haven't gone to life coaching school. Yes, but you've had a life, it's funny what kind of benchmarks we use as permission, right? And you were saying, essentially, you just had to look back, and I think you and I are probably pretty similar in this, data-driven people. And did you just look and think, okay, what were my failures that were actually due to some like lack of mine? Is that the analysis you were doing?
Yeah, it was really like, where in the history of my life have I seen this fear play out, honestly? Like, where do I have data points or experiences that I'd call data points to demonstrate to me that this fear is real or valid? And when I looked back and I was like, well, I never really failed at anything. And it doesn't mean I didn't screw things up or they didn't turn out well. But one, I just tend to believe that you don't fail if you don't quit. But when you quit, it's strategic and you're doing it to get you to something else. So it's not even quitting in the sense that I'm considering quitting, that it's like, if you stop trying altogether, that is failure. But that it doesn't mean that if you stop doing one thing or you pivot or adjust your path, that's a failure. And I think that, so some of that fear of failure in the first place comes with reframing, well, what is failure in the first place? And why am I so concerned with it? And at the time for me, it was really about other people's opinions and judgments around it more than even what it meant for myself. And the irony was, what I've learned too by looking back at these so-called data points, is that most people are not paying attention. Like, we are pretty egotistical when we sit around and think, or I'll speak for myself, when I sit around and think that someone is paying that much attention to my life and cares that much. And maybe they will. And maybe, like, think about some of the biggest flops publicly and that become these big things in the media, and how even those things are only a blip on the radar for a day or an hour or maybe a week. And maybe they bubble up again, but I am not that important. People don't know about me in those ways. I'm not hitting national media in that way and other ways.
Infamy. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was actually freeing to be like, wow, people actually don't give a damn that much about the things that I think they care as much about. Whereas it frees you to then think, I can care more and try more and take more perceived risks, because if the thing that's holding you back, like it was for me, was what other people's opinions were, then it's not really that big of a deal.
Yeah, absolutely. We've brought this up before on the podcast, I believe. I think it's a Wait But Why article, where it's got this little drawing, what you think everybody is doing. And have you seen this? It shows like a bunch of stick figures and they're all like looking at the guy in the center. And then the next one is what everybody's actually doing. And every stick figure's on his phone, like nobody is actually
anywhere else. Yeah. I mean, we're all in our own heads doing our own things, but we think everyone's paying attention to us. And maybe they are for like the 2 seconds you scroll through their Instagram feed and like see your picture, and then it's on to the next.
Right. Like maybe back 20 years ago, before social media, you did something, they could remember it, because it was on the nightly news. And then if it was on the nightly news again, okay, you capture headlines for a few days. But now with, like you said, you can just scroll and you can't keep thinking about this thing when, new Queer Eye comes out or whatever the thing is that will now get your new attention. That is hugely freeing. It's both, it's got two sides of the coin, because one, you're thinking, man, if I do something, everybody on social media is probably going to know about it if it fails, but they're also going to keep scrolling. And they're only going to know about it for a second. And they may celebrate you in that second. They may feel sorry for you in that second, but they're not going to feel much 10 seconds later.
Exactly.
So the second thing you were talking about, which I love, and I don't think we have discussed too often on this show, but it's a definite fear for me, is the fear of financial insecurity. Did you end up reading, I know you pronounce it Jen Sincero, right? Her yeah, so Italian. Did you read her book, You Are a Badass at Making Money?
I read both of her books and interviewed her.
Nice. I love her. I'm halfway through the money one. I already read You Are a Badass, but it had some great exercises. Did those, maybe you could talk a little bit about if you did any of those exercises that brought up anything for you that was helpful?
Well, I'll be honest. I read the book specifically to do the interview with her, she's a part of this virtual summit that I'm sure we'll talk about. And I was so pleased because I felt like a lot of what she talked about were things that I had just done accidentally. One in particular that I find so important, and I told her, I was like, it made me so happy to see that we had this in common and we're both sharing this publicly, was the idea of not only mapping out what you want your life to look like and what your goals are and how you vision that to be, but then next to all of it, assigning a dollar value and saying, okay, well, if I want to travel X amount, or if I want to be, these are some of mine, or if I want to be at the celebrations of my loved ones, or I want to read this many books a month, or I want a hammock, or I want a house that looks like this, or I want a pet, like put dollar values next to what those things cost to experience and live them, and then annualize it and say, okay, so the life I want costs X. And what I love about that, and what Jen demonstrated in her book as well, is that it gives you this framework to realize it's not just about chasing the dollar endlessly, which also creates this fear and this constant putting things into the future where you can never really be happy or be present or be contented because you're always chasing the next thing. And so for me, when I did this maybe 12 years ago at the time, and I was looking out to a 10-year time frame, my number was 120,000. And while that was so much money for where I was at the time, making like $35,000 back then, it was so freeing because I was like, okay, well, now I can reverse engineer this. And I know that 120K is 10K a month. And if it's 10K a month, then this is how I'm currently making money. And what's it going to take in new clients to bring me to that? And so it just gave me this framework to know, okay, this is how I get from A to Z. And it also allowed me, once I hit Z, to say, okay, now that I'm there, do I want to chase more? And if so, why? Before I just did it. And so it really took this idea of money and the endless chase of wealth and just having more for more's sake into a place that felt more palatable and like I had a real value-centric approach to it.
That's so powerful. I love that. I just finished that very exercise. And you're right. It's hard to know what our goal is aside from more. You know, I just need to make more money. Well, you're right. When you get to 120, do you still need to make more? And why? And when will that angst leave you? You know, when you're Richard Branson status, you know, and you've got just heaps of it, like Scrooge McDuck style from the 80s, you know, like
swimming in your piles of gold.
Your gold coin piles. And putting that number, you're right. It decreases that anxiety because I think the unknown, especially in the quit scenario, fear of unknown is a difficult thing and has a lot of emotion behind it, but also fear of the unknown. When will that, the lack of knowing when enough is enough financially is what I'm trying to say here. Because you're right, without putting down exactly what you need to make you quote unquote happy or stable or financially set enough that you're not having to worry and that you're able to live the life that you like, without knowing that number, you could just go on forever with this existential angst that you're not earning enough. And when I did that exercise, I envisioned this house that had a sauna in it. And it forces you to look up the cost of these things in that exercise. And I went to Amazon. I remember being at a coffee shop with my little Jen's book and my notepad. And I opened my phone to check out the price of this sauna. And it turns out that there was like an individual version for under $200 that put in your closet. And I was like, I can have my dream life right now. Bye. And I thought that was so funny because just that exercise opened me to like, oh, this sauna isn't even out of my reach. But it was one of those things like, someday when I'm successful and financially stable, I'll have a sauna. Now I'll have it in 2 days thanks to Prime. It was totally different energy. Okay.
I just want to echo that. Like, it's so true that we often think that happiness is down the road. And actually, one of my favorite interviews I've ever done is with Deepak Chopra. And he said something to me I'll never forget, which was, if you're not happy right now, you'll never be happy. And I love that, because if we're constantly chasing the, if blank happens, then I will feel blank. I get it. Like, we're goal oriented, we're driven, we're motivated, and that's great. And it's important. And that at least gives me some purpose to want to keep going. But he's totally right that if we can't be happy or content right now, we're endlessly chasing something that's never going to exist.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And on that note, moving to the third one was quitting. I believe you said quitting other people's expectations. And we talked a minute ago about how realizing that they're only going to be thinking about you for a split second was probably a big part of that, right?
Yeah, we talked about that. And we also talked about the quitting the I'm not good enough mentality. So I don't know if you want to go into both or if you want to talk about one.
Well, I think you brought up your family. And I think a lot of people have that, because if anybody is going to be thinking about you for more than 10 seconds, it's your family, right? So how did you, by the way, we're trying this over a video for anybody who's listening to this, and video is somehow less likely to pick up when she and I are talking at the same time, but she's saying lots of things that I think are getting caught off. Maybe it will all show up in the recording, but regardless, you had said, family, like I said, is the one area where people may be thinking about you. So how did you address their expectations?
That was tough. Like, I remember explicitly there being a time where my mom called me and said, "Are you sure you should keep going?" And what she meant was, should you keep growing this first company? Because we had the financial rug pulled out from under us on multiple occasions, to the point where we were pretty much back at zero, and they were really, really devastating. And it's tough, because as any entrepreneur knows, when you are in a growth stage, and especially in an early stage of your business, the last thing you need is someone to put any doubt in your mind. And while I knew that she was coming from a place of love and concern, she also was coming from a place of not knowing and experiencing what I was experiencing. And so it was coming from a more traditional mindset. And I respected it and I appreciated where she was coming from, but it was like the kryptonite. Like, it was exactly what I didn't need in that moment, because I was already doubting myself so intensely. So when she added that little bit, and you're like, wow, one of the people who loves me most in this planet is telling me maybe you shouldn't keep going, that fuels so many other things in your head of like, am I not good enough? Can I not do this? Should we not do this? And so that was tough, because there's been multiple points where my family has interceded on things that I didn't ask for and wasn't necessarily interested in some cases, kind of wish they hadn't. But I've had to learn my own boundaries with my family as well as everyone else for multiple things, but to learn about how do you take in outside opinion and put it through the sieve to decide ultimately what really sits with me, what do I really want to hold on to versus what do I want to let go. And that takes your own time and intention, and I think personal development, to recognize that just because you respect someone or trust them doesn't necessarily equate to their word is sacrosanct, where is my language right now? But meaning that you can still decide, do I want some of that? Do I want all of that? Do I want none of that? And that's what I had to start doing with family, realizing that no matter how much they have lived, experiences they've had, even some of them have been entrepreneurs themselves, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're aligned with my instinct, that they're aligned with my vision, or that they fully know the whole picture, because they don't.
Yeah. Did you end up getting any mentors that you thought, okay, my family may or may not have the input that is helpful. Let me find somebody who has walked the path I want to walk and ask their opinion?
Absolutely. I think it's really important to seek people out who have done things before that are in alignment with where you're going. And those evolve over time as you grow and as your business grows or your life changes. And sometimes I sought them out directly and just was looking for someone with a skill set like, hey, I don't know a lot about bookkeeping and accounting. I need to find someone who understands that and can help teach me some of the basics. And then that woman, for example, became a longtime mentor of mine until we both sort of just outgrew the relationship, and that was very natural. Or in other cases, it was really accidental where you just get to know someone. Like there was someone that I called a co-mentor where we mentored each other. And it was more recently where I was at a point where I realized I wanted to grow in my knowledge of digital marketing. And she is exceptional at that. And she wanted to grow and scale her business in ways she hadn't done before and felt that I could bring that value to her. So we just ultimately were friends first and realized we had sort of the missing pieces that each other was looking for, and just said, hey, would you want to sort of formally and informally be co-mentors for some period of time? And I say formally and informally because we called each other that and we knew we could count on each other to bounce ideas and grow and learn and ask. But it also was informal in the sense that we chose to not say every Tuesday at this time, we're going to have this much time together, because that just wasn't our style and we weren't looking for it. But I've also brought on coaches who it was that way, where every other Wednesday we're going to talk at 1 p.m. and we're going to talk for an hour, and here's the goal of that. And so I think no matter where you are or how you want that to look, it's always important to surround yourself with people who can help carry you along on new parts of the path and mentor or guide, whether it's with an actual mentorship title or a coaching title or just a friendship title.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned this summit that you are putting together. Was there, and before we started recording, we were chatting a little bit, is there something that you are leaving to start this summit? Is there a quit involved there?
Definitely. So I think ultimately, like people always talk about, can you have it all? And I think it was Oprah who said, you can have it all, you just can't have it all at the same time. I tend to agree with that. I also really believe in integration. So like, how do you achieve as many of your goals at one time simultaneously? Like, how do they overlap? And so when it comes to something like this summit, I realized that what I needed to do was a lot like what I did in my first company, was find ways to take myself out as the cog in the middle of the wheel for my second company that had at that point been taking about 90% of my time and attention. And that as I was able to hand more and more off to my team and bring in new people to help take some of that weight off of me to free me up to do this summit, that's what it took. It took basically quitting all of the tasks that I had ownership of. And even right now, I'm hiring someone initially as an apprentice to come on and learn everything I've learned growing the networking events company, and ultimately take over for the Atlanta market, just like we have people who run our other markets, in a way that I had never wanted to do before, because it felt so connected. It felt like my baby. I grew this market personally. So much of our community is here, and that just felt so intertwined and entangled with who I am and what I cared about, that it was scary to say, okay, I want to give this to someone else. But I had to make that decision because I realized it's hard to have my heart in all of these things at the same time fully and give them what they need and deserve. So had to quit that, so to speak.
Gotcha. And you snuck something in there. And if you have something to say about it, great. If not, I understand, we're coming nearish the end of our time. But you mentioned something that sounds borderline like an identity quit. And that is one of the most difficult quits. Did you have to process anything along those lines to be able to make the shift?
Absolutely. I mean, each time I've made a transition from, credit card processing company into the networking events company, and now from that into this virtual summit and this book that I'm writing all together, it has been around, how do I let go of the way that I've identified publicly or that I've considered myself? And so often I think about, how do I introduce myself? Like you and I even had this conversation before we started our video recording of, how do you want me to introduce you? And that has been a question I have struggled with for years, because typically I wear a lot of hats, and then we tend to take a lot of identity around what are those titles and what does that mean and how do other people perceive those things. And so each of those times, yes, I've had to reestablish with myself first and fundamentally acknowledge that was an era and a stage, and that thing is not gone, but it is not my primary focus right now. And it's a piece of me, and it helped me get on my journey to where I am now to share and serve in these new ways. And that isn't simple. And those aren't things that I just come to in an instant. I usually struggle with them for a while, probably longer than I need to, which is exactly what happened with bringing on this apprentice and putting out the job description. That probably for 12 months did I know in my gut that it was time to make some sort of a change. And I knew, because I'd show up to events and really not want to be there. And I felt like I had grown in another direction. but I felt like I made a commitment. And this is also, like you said, an identity that I have assumed. And I believe in what it's about. And I just didn't know that someone else could do it to the same caliber, which was ridiculous. And so the second I started considering, should I really do it? I could feel that my body was like, yes. And it was more expansive instead of contracted. And the second I put that job description out, I was just like, yes, we're going to do this. This is happening. It's going to be good. And so, yeah, it definitely took an identity quit.
A few things in there that I love. You illustrated the point in a way that it's sometimes hard to illustrate on paper as exactly as you did, but I often say, if you make the decision to quit and you feel better, then you know it's the right quit. Whereas you were like, okay, I put out the ad, I haven't quit yet, but I have taken step one toward quitting, a very tangible step, and you felt that sense of relief and that sense of expansion. And thank you for bringing that up, because that's how I think, if you were on the fence at all about a quit, make some small move toward the quit, even if it's just a mental telling yourself, okay, I'm going to quit in 3 years or so. It doesn't matter when the time is. If you notice how you feel and feel whether or not that contraction finally lets loose. And the second thing that you said was, how do we introduce ourselves? And I wanted to give a shout out to my coach, Colette, because she is always working with me on that. Because if you walk up to me and say, what do you do? I'm like, I'm a doctor at the VA. Just no, let's work on this. And we spent, I'd swear, like, an hour-long session at some point in time formulating a new identity, because I'll always be a doctor, sure, but that's not, like you said, that's not where my energy is. I'm a quitting evangelist. I help people to and through their quits, and it's not easy, because I still have to remind myself. And even though this is what I'm passionate about, and medicine is not what I'm passionate about any longer, but I've been practicing for 13 years, so it doesn't just go away overnight. And so I appreciate that you shared that it took you 12 months to be able to even make that move. And from here, could you please tell us about this summit?
Absolutely. So this summit is a long time in the making. It's something I'm really excited about, because it's basically taking everything that I've done over the past decade or so to intentionally design my life and career, to create a framework for other people to do it. That's completely, it's all online. So you can access it from anywhere, wearing anything that you want to wear. And it's completely free. So there's no barrier to entry. And it's 3 days. Day one takes everyone through first the internal work of, how do you build this relationship with yourself to even know what it is that you want in this world, and slow down a little to say, well, the world might tell me that success looks like XYZ. Like I said earlier, like go to school, get good grades, get a job, or become a doctor, or whatever the thing is. If there's any part of you that thinks that path for you is not totally fulfilling, or that there's more that you want to express, but you're not sure how, like this is going to help you get unstuck and assess what those things are, how to tap in with yourself to get there, and then how to map it out to start moving towards it. Whereas day two is going to take you through designing your career and our entrepreneurial journey to integrate with what it is that you actually want, and then finance it like we talked about. And then day three is all about the network and the community to support you and those goals, and they in return, because I deeply believe that the fastest way to the success that you're looking for is through the people in your network that are going to support you and open doors for you. And it's also a lot less lonely and more fun to do it together than it is to try and do it on your own. So we have speakers, we've mentioned 2 of them, like Deepak Chopra, who leads it off, and Jen Sincero, who closes it. We've got Adam Grant, who is a world-renowned speaker on giving and having careers of meaning, and 45 others. It's 20 hours of content, and people can pop in and out as they choose. So a lot of free, great content for people to engage with.
Excellent. Where can they find out more about this and sign up and get notifications when it is live?
Great. It's lifebydesignsummit.com.
I love things that are / by design. Just saying. I think we discussed, my book is called Quitting by Design. So if you can remember that, then just remember lifebydesignsummit.com. It sounds like a great time. I will be heading over there. You will have my email in a few minutes on that list. And I really appreciate you sharing everything with us today. Is there anything that I have not asked you that I should have?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I mean, ultimately, I think at the end of the day, when we want to quit something or don't want to quit something, there's usually some underlying fear or belief system that we need to address. And often I think the solution to that is just quieting and slowing down enough to find it. Because it can be really easy to look at the symptom, we'll speak doctor terms, the symptom, but not really the actual problem that's the root cause of it. And that's no different in your physical health as it is in your mental health. And that all, I believe, spurs out and has ripple effects into all the other choices and actions that you have in life. I also think that something that's really important to say is, like, as we're talking about life by design or quitting by design, is some people think this stuff is really selfish. And they think it's really selfish of me to want to invest the time and energy or to quit something when maybe other people don't have the luxury or the opportunity, or who am I to do that because I have bills to pay or I have real obligations. Like, that's real. And that is not to be snuffed off. Like, those are real things. But I just deeply believe, both from studies as well as anecdotally and experientially, that when you can quit with intention to move yourself into things that really light you up and make you able to express your highest and best gifts in the world, that not only are you showing people that it's possible and demonstrating it for them and creating this ripple effect again of positive momentum where other people are going to feel like they can do that too, but it gives you more of an opportunity to share that in the world, which thus then again has a ripple effect or a domino effect of positive outcome. So to me, it just seems selfish not to do it. And the other piece of that too that we talked about with money is, and Jen talks about this as well, is I think it's selfish not to want to make money, because when you make money, you have more money to give. And it allows you to be not only abundance available, but like it helps, I think, create an abundance mindset when you have more abundance in the first place. And so I tend to believe that you get more of what you give. I'm a believer in giving, not just monetarily, but like of your resources, of your connections, of your time, of your friendship, of whatever you have to offer, and allowing that to be something that grows. So I don't know, I'm going in circles a little bit because there's so much that we could say, but ultimately this is not selfish work. It is not selfish to want to be your best, to want to live a life that really feels aligned and alive for you. And like, I'm not a coach. I'm just saying it because I'm someone who's done it. And I'm sharing this simply because I think it's selfish of me not to share this stuff that I have learned and accessed. So I'll leave you with that.
Amen, sister. I love 100% of that. I'm not even going to add to it. Just know that yes, 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 and yes. Thank you for sharing that very much. I'm like, anything else you want to share? You're like, yeah, I'm going to drop a ton of truth bombs. Just a second. Awesome. Darrah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Excellent. For everybody else out there, until next time, happy quitting.